I never thought I'd be the kind of man to second-guess his wife. I built my life on certainty, on control. I ran a business where hesitation meant failure, where instinct was everything. But no instinct had prepared me for this. Vivian was changing. It wasn't something obvious at first, just a shift, a subtle disturbance in the rhythm of our life. Late nights at work, texts she hid from me, the way she turned away when I reached for her. I told myself it was stress, that I was overthinking. But doubt has a way of growing, creeping into the quiet spaces of the mind until it drowns out reason. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. She was getting ready for dinner with colleagues. I watched her in the mirror as she adjusted her dress, one I hadn't seen before, one that hugged her body just a little too perfectly. Perfume, heels, the delicate touch of lipstick she used to save for special occasions. "You look amazing," I said. My voice was calm. "Testing." She smiled. "Quick, practiced. Just a work thing." "Liar." I nodded, stepping behind her, resting my hands on her shoulders. She stiffened, just for a moment, then relaxed, tilting her head back against me. "You sure you don't want me to come?" I murmured, watching her face in the mirror. She laughed lightly, too lightly. "It's just boring work talk. You'd hate it." I kissed the top of her head. "Have fun." She left, and I watched from the window as she walked down the driveway, her heels clicking against the pavement. The way she moved, the way she looked back once before getting into the car, it wasn't guilt. It was excitement. I picked up my phone and made the call. Samuel Rourke, a rough voice answered. "I need you to follow my wife." A pause. "How soon?" "Now." That night, I sat alone in my study, a half-empty glass of whiskey beside me, my mind racing through possibilities. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe she really was out with colleagues, sipping wine, talking business, coming home to me in a few hours with nothing but exhaustion in her eyes. But my gut told me otherwise. Then, at exactly 9:32 p.m., my phone buzzed. A message. "She's not at dinner. Sending location." I stared at the screen, feeling the weight of inevitability. A red pin marked the spot, an address I recognized. The Grand Heights Hotel. A cold, detached part of me had already expected this, but expectation didn't dull the impact. The next message came seconds later. Photos attached. I clicked. The first image was clear as day. Vivian in the dim glow of the hotel entrance, smiling, her hand resting lightly on a man's arm. Tall, well-dressed, familiar. Marcus Adler. My stomach twisted. I knew him. A lawyer, a name that carried weight in the city. We had crossed paths before. Hell, we had even shared drinks once. The betrayal cut deeper knowing she had chosen him. I scrolled through the rest. More photos. More evidence. Her eyes locked on him, her lips forming words meant only for him. The way his hand found the small of her back, guiding her inside. I exhaled slowly, pressing my thumb against my temple. This wasn't just an affair. It was calculated, carefully hidden, and she had assumed I wouldn't notice. She had underestimated me. At 11:07 p.m., Vivian walked through the front door, her expression light, as if she hadn't just burned our marriage to the ground. I sat in the armchair, watching her. "How was dinner?" She set her purse down. "Good. A bit long, though." She had no idea. "Did you close the deal?" I asked, studying her face. She hesitated. Just for a second. "Not yet. Still in discussions." "Liar." She walked over, kissed my cheek. Her lips were warm, soft, tainted. "I'm exhausted," she sighed. "Going to shower and head to bed." I watched her disappear into the bathroom. The sound of running water filled the silence she left behind. I pulled out my phone and opened the last message from Rourke. A video file. I hesitated for just a second before pressing play. The grainy footage showed them in the hotel lounge, sitting close, her hand brushing his fingers trailing up her arm, her laughing at something he said, tilting her head in that way she used to do with me. I clenched my jaw. I had all the proof I needed. And still, I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. No, this wasn't just about catching her. It wasn't about anger or heartbreak. This was war, and I was going to make sure I won. There are moments in life when everything changes, not suddenly, not like a lightning strike, but slowly, like watching a crack spread through glass. You see it happening, but by the time you react, it's already too late. I never imagined I'd be here. I never imagined that the woman I built a life with, the woman I loved, would be the one to destroy me. Yet, here I was. The night before, I had barely slept. I had spent hours staring at the photos on my phone, proof that my wife, Vivian, was in the arms of Marcus Adler. The images played over and over in my mind like a nightmare on repeat. A part of me kept searching for an explanation, for some reason, some excuse that would make this all make sense. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe it was a mistake. But the cold, logical part of me, the part that had built an empire from nothing, knew better. This was intentional. And the worst part? She didn't even seem guilty. The next morning, I left before she woke up. I needed space. The city was just waking up when I reached my office. The air was crisp, but my mind was a storm. My assistant, Claire, blinked in surprise when I walked in. "You're early, Mr. Steele." I forced a smile. "Long night." She hesitated. "Is everything okay?" I almost laughed. "No, Claire. Everything is not okay. My wife is sleeping with another man, and I don't even recognize my own life anymore." But instead, I nodded. "Just busy. Hold my calls for an hour." I closed the door behind me and sank into my chair, my head in my hands. I could feel it creeping in, the anger, the hurt, the disbelief. It felt like being trapped in a house that was already burning, knowing the walls were crumbling, knowing I should run, but unable to move. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Samuel Rourke. "Got more. Need to talk." An hour later, Rourke sat across from me in my office, his expression unreadable. "You saw everything?" he asked. I nodded. "I need more." He smirked. I figured. That's why I kept digging. He slid a manila folder across my desk. "She's been talking to Adler for months. But it's not just an affair, Steele. It's worse." I exhaled slowly, opening the folder. Inside were bank records. Small amounts of money transferred into an account I didn't recognize. "She's been taking money?" My voice was quieter than I expected. Not enough to notice. Yet. But the pattern is there. My stomach twisted. Vivian and I never fought about money. We had more than enough, and I had always made sure she had everything she wanted. So why? I looked up at Rourke. "What is she planning?" His expression darkened. "I don't know yet. But if she's moving money in secret, and if she's tied to Adler, it's not good." I clenched my jaw. This wasn't just betrayal. This was something else. I needed answers. And I knew exactly where to start. That evening, I walked through the front door at the usual time, forcing myself to act normal. Vivian was in the kitchen, pouring a glass of wine. She smiled when she saw me, like nothing had changed. "Hey, baby. How was your day?" I studied her. Her eyes were bright, her body relaxed, as if she wasn't hiding anything. As if she hadn't spent last night in a hotel room with another man. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. "Busy," I said. "Yours?" She shrugged. "Same as always." I stepped closer. She smelled like vanilla and expensive perfume, one I knew she hadn't put on for me. I forced a smile. "New perfume." She laughed lightly. "Yeah, you like it." I kissed her temple. "It's nice." It wasn't. At dinner, she talked about work, about clients, about nonsense. I nodded. I smiled. I played my role. But in my mind, I was somewhere else. I wasn't going to ask her what was going on. I was going to find out. The next morning, I called Nicholas Carter. "Steele," he answered. "We need to talk." A pause. Then, "About what?" "You already know." Silence. Then, "Meet me in an hour." The usual place. I hung up, my chest tight. Nicholas had been my closest friend for over a decade. He was the one person I trusted. But lately, something felt off. The way he avoided certain topics. The way he hesitated when I brought up Adler. And now, I needed to know if my best friend was part of this betrayal too. An hour later, I sat across from Nicholas in a dimly lit bar. He took a slow sip of whiskey, watching me. "What's this about?" I leaned forward. "Vivian. And Adler." Nicholas froze. Just for a second. But I saw it. And in that second, I knew. He wasn't surprised. He already knew. I forced myself to stay calm. "Tell me everything." "Now." Nicholas exhaled, rubbing his jaw. "Steele, you don't want to do this." "I already have," I said coldly. "The only thing you need to decide is whether you're with me or against me." He looked away, his fingers tapping against his glass. Then, finally, he nodded. And my world shattered all over again. This betrayal went deeper than I ever imagined. That night, I sat in my study, staring at my phone. A new message from Rourke. "It's worse than we thought. Call me." I dialed immediately. Rourke picked up on the first ring. "We've got a problem." "Tell me." "It's not just an affair, Steele. It's a setup. Adler and Vivian are planning something big." And Nicholas? He's in on it too. I felt the ground shift beneath me. They weren't just betraying me. They were trying to destroy me. Betrayal is a strange thing. It doesn't hit all at once. It seeps into your bones, corrodes your mind, twists everything you thought you knew until nothing feels real anymore. After my conversation with Nicholas, I drove around the city aimlessly, trying to push down the suffocating weight in my chest. Vivian, Marcus Adler, Nicholas, all of them had turned against me. I had spent years building an empire, making strategic moves, controlling every variable. Yet, I had been blind to what was happening inside my own home. But not anymore. I wasn't going to sit back and let them take everything from me. I wasn't going to let them win. It was time for me to make my own move. The next morning, I called Samuel Rourke. I need more, I said the moment he answered. Rourke chuckled. More of what? Because from where I'm sitting, you've already got enough to burn your wife to the ground. This isn't just about her, I said, gripping the phone tightly. I need to know everything about Adler and Nicholas. Their connection. Their plan. And I need it fast. There was a pause. Then, understood. But still, if you're thinking about going to war, you better make sure you're ready for the cost. I am, I said. And I meant it. That evening, I went home as if nothing had changed. Vivian was waiting for me in the living room, curled up on the couch with a glass of wine. She looked up and smiled, but something in her eyes flickered, hesitation, doubt. Hey, baby, she said, patting the space beside her. Long day? I walked over, leaned down, and pressed a slow kiss to her lips. She tensed. Not much. Just enough for me to notice. Yeah, I said smoothly. But coming home to you makes it worth it. She exhaled softly, her fingers curling around the stem of her wine glass. You're sweet. No, I'm just smarter than you think. I sat beside her, draping my arm around her shoulders. She leaned into me, but it felt forced, like she was playing a role she no longer believed in. I decided to push. I was thinking, I murmured, brushing my fingers along her arm. We haven't taken a trip in a while. Maybe we should go somewhere. Just us. Vivian's body stiffened almost imperceptibly. A trip. Yeah, somewhere private. I kissed her temple, letting my voice soften. We could use some time away from everything. She pulled back slightly, flashing me a tight-lipped smile. That sounds amazing, but work is just really crazy right now. Maybe in a few months. Liar. She didn't want to go anywhere with me. Because she was planning something. I smiled back, pretending to let it go. Yeah, of course. Whenever you're ready. I let the conversation drift to other things, mindless chatter about her day, her projects, her friends. She didn't mention Marcus Adler once. Neither did I. Later that night, after Vivian had fallen asleep, I went to my office and unlocked the safe hidden behind the bookshelf. Inside were two things, a loaded handgun and a flash drive. I ignored the gun for now, picking up the drive instead. It contained a backup of everything I had on Vivian and Marcus. The photos. The bank transfers. The recorded phone calls Rourke had managed to obtain. I plugged it into my laptop and began scrolling through the files, my mind working at lightning speed. Then, my phone buzzed. A message from Rourke. Meet me. Now. 20 minutes later, I stepped into a dimly lit diner, the kind of place where secrets were exchanged without a second glance. Rourke was already seated in the corner booth, a cup of black coffee in front of him. He slid a folder across the table the moment I sat down. This, he said, is what you've been waiting for. I opened it. Inside were phone transcripts, emails, documents, and at the center of it all was Marcus Adler. He wasn't just sleeping with my wife. He wasn't just helping her steal from me. He was trying to take my company. Vivian's been feeding him information for months, Rourke said. Financials, contracts, upcoming deals. Everything he needs to gut you from the inside out. I clenched my jaw, my pulse hammering. Why? Rourke leaned back. Because he's not working alone. I looked up sharply. What? Rourke sighed. Adler has investors. Powerful ones. He's been positioning himself to take over your company. And Nicholas? He's in on it too. A sharp, bitter laugh escaped me. My best friend. My wife. My company. I shook my head. It's all connected. Rourke took a slow sip of his coffee. So, what's your next move? I stared at the documents in front of me. I could go to the police. I could file a lawsuit. I could tear them apart legally, piece by piece. But none of that felt satisfying. No. I was going to play their game. And I was going to beat them at it. When I got home that night, Vivian was already asleep. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, watching her, wondering how many nights she had fallen asleep beside me knowing she was planning to betray me. How many lies she had whispered into my ear. I walked to the closet and pulled out a small hidden recording device I had planted there earlier that week. I plugged it into my laptop and listened. Voices. Vivian. And Nicholas. I gritted my teeth as I heard my wife laugh softly. Jonathan doesn't suspect anything. Nicholas's voice was lower, more careful. Are you sure? He's a smart man. Vivian scoffed. He's too busy to notice. By the time he figures it out, it'll be too late. A long silence. Then Nicholas again. And if he does figure it out? Vivian's voice dropped to a whisper. Then we make sure he can't stop us. I closed my laptop, my entire body rigid with anger. This wasn't just about taking my company. This was about taking me down. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. I wasn't going to give them the chance. If they wanted to play dirty, I'd play dirtier. Betrayal doesn't just break you. It rebuilds you into someone harder, colder, someone who doesn't look at the world the same way anymore. I wasn't the same man I had been a week ago. I didn't wake up expecting love from my wife. I didn't walk into my office trusting my best friend. I didn't believe in loyalty, not anymore. But that didn't mean I was broken. It meant I was ready. And today, I was going to make my first move. I sat in my penthouse, a glass of whiskey untouched in my hands, staring at the city skyline. I used to love this view. Now, it felt different. Like I was seeing it through someone else's eyes. The eyes of a man who knew his wife had been sleeping with another man. The eyes of a man who knew his best friend was planning to rip his company out from under him. The eyes of a man who wasn't going to let them get away with it. My phone buzzed. Rourke, tell me you have something, I said, voice low. Oh, I have more than something, he said. I could hear the satisfaction in his tone. I have everything. I stood, running a hand through my hair. How bad is it? Bad for them, Rourke said. Good for you. I exhaled, my chest tightening. Where are you? Meet me at the usual place. We'll go over the details. I grabbed my coat. It was time. The diner was almost empty when I arrived. The kind of place where no one asked questions, where no one cared about overheard conversations. Rourke was already waiting for me in the corner booth. He slid a thick envelope across the table the moment I sat down. Everything's in there, he said. I hesitated. For just a second. Then I opened it. Inside were financial records. Emails. Phone logs. Transactions. Every single piece of proof tying Vivian, Marcus Adler, and Nicholas Carter together. Every time she had met Marcus at a hotel. Every time Nicholas had moved money out of my company and into their accounts. Every single lie they had told me. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to breathe. I've been a fool, I murmured. Rourke shook his head. No, you trusted the wrong people. I swallowed hard. And now, Rourke smirked. Now, you burn them to the ground. That night, I sat across from Vivian at dinner, watching her closely. She smiled at me like everything was fine. Like she wasn't sleeping with another man. Like she wasn't helping him steal my company. Like she didn't deserve to lose everything. How was work? She asked, sipping her wine. I forced a small smile. Busy. She nodded, twirling her fork through her pasta. Yeah, same here. Liar. I watched her for a long moment, memorizing the way she looked, the way she spoke, because soon, everything was going to change, and I needed to remember who she was before I destroyed her. The next morning, I called Celeste Holloway. I had worked with a lot of lawyers, but Celeste? She was a different breed. Sharp, merciless, the kind of woman who could ruin your life with a single legal document. I sat in her office, staring out at the skyline, feeling the weight of the moment settle over me. You're quiet, Celeste said, folding her hands in front of her. I turned to her. I need to protect what's mine. She studied me for a moment. From what? I slid the envelope across her desk. Celeste opened it, flipping through the documents. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes? They darkened. Your wife? She asked. I nodded. Nicholas Carter? Another nod. She exhaled slowly, leaning back. They're making a move against you. They were, I corrected. Now, I'm making mine. She smirked. You're ready for war? I met her gaze. I was built for it. The next day, I met Nicholas for drinks. He had no idea that I already knew. That I had spent the past 48 hours shutting down every single path he and Marcus had created. That the money they had stolen was frozen. That the buyout they had planned was blocked. That I was about to end this. Nicholas clinked his glass against mine. To the future. I smiled. To the future. Then I leaned in. But not yours. Nicholas frowned. What? I set my glass down. I know everything, Nick. His face changed. He didn't pretend he didn't understand. He didn't fake confusion. He just froze. And in that moment, I saw it. The realization that he had lost. Nicholas, I said, my voice quiet. You betrayed me. He exhaled slowly. Steal. I held up a hand. Don't. A long silence. Then I stood. You have two choices, I said. You resign quietly and disappear. Or I destroy you. Nicholas swallowed hard. He knew me well enough to know I wasn't bluffing. Finally, he nodded. Fine. I nodded once, then walked away. One down. Two to go. That night, I came home to Vivian. She was in bed, reading, looking like a woman who still thought she was winning. I leaned against the doorway, watching her. She glanced up and smiled. Hey, baby. I smiled back. Hey, sweetheart. I walked over, brushing a hand through her hair. She leaned into my touch, sighing softly. I studied her. I had loved her once. But now? She was nothing to me. I leaned down, pressing a kiss to her forehead, and whispered, You should get some rest, Vivian. She frowned. Why? I met her eyes. Because tomorrow? I smiled. Everything changes. And for the first time. She looked afraid. Betrayal changes you. Not in a way that's obvious. It doesn't happen all at once. It's slow. Like a crack in glass that spreads until suddenly the whole thing shatters. I was already broken. But tonight, I wasn't the one who was going to fall apart. Tonight, I was the one holding the hammer. The morning was filled with silence. Vivian moved around the house like normal, completely unaware that every step she took, every word she spoke, was leading her closer to the end. She kissed me on the cheek before heading out the door. And as I watched her leave, I felt something unexpected. Not anger. Not hate. Not relief. Just nothing. Whatever love I once had for her was already dead. At exactly 9 a.m., I stepped into my office, and Celeste Holloway was waiting. She didn't waste time. She never did. She placed a folder in front of me. It's all done. I exhaled, running a hand over my face. Everything. She nodded. The divorce papers are finalized. The financial fraud case is prepared. Nicholas Carter has officially been removed from your company. And Marcus Adler. She smirked. As of this morning, his bank accounts have been frozen, his investors have backed out, and his reputation is in flames. I leaned back, letting the weight of it sink in. They thought they could take everything from me. Instead, I had taken everything from them. Celeste tilted her head. How do you feel? I let out a slow breath. I don't know yet, but I would soon. Because tonight, it was time for the final move. Vivian was already home when I arrived. She was sitting on the couch, wine glass in hand, scrolling through her phone. She looked up and smiled. Hey, baby. I studied her, taking in everything. The way she forced the smile. The way her fingers twitched slightly, her body tense. She knew something was wrong. I stepped forward, pulling a folded document from my pocket and setting it on the table between us. Vivian blinked. Then slowly, she reached for it. Her eyes moved over the words. And then as she froze, I watched as the color drained from her face. She looked up at me, her voice barely a whisper. You're divorcing me? I exhaled, nodding. Yes. Her hands trembled slightly. Jonathan, I held up a hand. Don't lie. Not anymore. Tears welled in her eyes. I never wanted. You did. I swallowed hard. You made a choice, Vivian. And now, you're going to live with it. She set the papers down, rubbing her temples. Jonathan, please. We can talk about this. We can. I laughed softly. Talk? I shook my head. You never wanted to talk when you were sneaking around behind my back. You never wanted to talk when you were helping Marcus Adler steal from me. But now? Now that I'm the one making the decisions? Now you want to talk? Her lip trembled. I still love you. I let out a breath. Then you should have chosen me. Silence. Long, heavy silence. Then, a knock at the door. Right on time. Vivian stiffened. I walked over and pulled the door open. Marcus Adler. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. His suit was rumpled, his jaw clenched. The moment he saw me, he froze. His eyes flicked to Vivian, then back to me. You son of a. I smiled. Nice to see you too, Marcus. His hands clenched into fists. What the hell did you do? I poured myself a drink, taking my time before responding. Be more specific. My accounts, he spat. My business. My reputation. It's all gone. I finished for him. Marcus swallowed hard. He was just now realizing. I tilted my head. You thought you could take from me and walk away clean? His jaw tightened. We can fix this. I chuckled. No, Marcus. You're finished. Vivian's breath hitched. She turned to Marcus, realizing something. You knew this could happen? Marcus didn't respond. And in that moment, I saw it. The betrayal within the betrayal. Vivian had trusted Marcus. But Marcus? He had only ever trusted himself. I let the silence stretch, watching her finally understand. Then I leaned toward Marcus, voice cold. I want you gone. Out of my life. Out of my city. You try anything else, and I make sure you don't have a single cent left. Marcus exhaled sharply, looking at Vivian. Let's go, he muttered. She hesitated. For the first time, she hesitated. And in that moment, I saw it. Regret. But it was too late for that. She made her choice. And now, she had to live with it. Marcus grabbed her wrist, pulling her toward the door. And she went with him. She always would. The door shut behind them. And just like that, Vivian was gone. Marcus was ruined. And I? For the first time in months, I was free. I sat in the empty house long after they left. The silence was deafening. For the first time in years, there was no sound of Vivian's soft footsteps down the hall. No faint hum of her favorite late-night playlist. No perfume lingering in the air. She was gone. And I thought that would feel like victory. But all I felt was emptiness. I wasn't sad. I wasn't relieved. I was just tired. This was what I wanted. This was what needed to happen. Then why did it feel like I had been the one left behind? I stood up, walking through the house, trailing my fingers along the furniture, the walls. Everything looked the same. And yet, nothing was. I poured myself a drink and stepped onto the balcony, the city lights flickering below. I had spent so much time fighting to protect what was mine. My company. My future. My pride. And now that I had one, I realized something. Winning meant nothing if you had no one to share it with. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about revenge. I wasn't thinking about Vivian, or Marcus, or Nicholas. I was thinking about what came next. Because for the first time in a long time, I had no idea. And maybe, just maybe, that wasn't such a bad thing. The days after Vivian left were quiet. Too quiet. I had spent so long fighting, planning, waiting for the next betrayal, the next move in a game I never agreed to play. But now? Now, there was nothing. No war left to fight. No enemies left to take down. No one waiting in the shadows to strike. Just me. And the silence. And for the first time, I didn't know what to do with either. At first, I tried to convince myself that this was what I wanted. Vivian was gone. Marcus was ruined. Nicholas had been forced out of my company. I had everything back. Everything they tried to take from me. But winning didn't feel like I thought it would. I expected relief. Instead, all I felt was exhaustion. Like I had been running for so long that I had forgotten what it was like to just stop. I walked through the house, past the remnants of a life that no longer existed. Vivian's perfume had faded from the bedroom. Her clothes were no longer draped over the chair in the corner. Her favorite coffee mug wasn't in the kitchen sink. The house felt bigger, as if it had swallowed her absence whole. I should have felt peace. Instead, I felt like I was standing in the middle of something unfinished. I poured myself a drink, the amber liquid swirling in the glass, and sank into the leather armchair in my study. For years, I had built my life on control. Control over my company, my reputation, my future. But love? I had thought love was something I could trust. Something that was real. Instead, love had become just another battlefield. I had trusted Vivian, and she had betrayed me. I had trusted Nicholas, and he had used me. I had trusted Marcus to be nothing more than a cockroach crawling beneath my feet. And somehow, he had still managed to bite. I clenched my jaw, my grip tightening around the glass. I wasn't sad. I wasn't heartbroken. I was just done. Done with giving people chances they didn't deserve. Done with pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Done with waiting for happiness to come from someone else. I didn't need Vivian. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need anyone. For the first time, I understood. Winning wasn't about taking everything back. Winning was about starting over. I threw myself into work over the next few weeks. Not because I had to, but because I needed to. I restructured the company. I made moves that Nicholas never could have made. I secured new deals that Marcus had been too weak to pull off. I cleaned house. And every single person who had stood beside them, I erased them. If they had even the smallest stain of loyalty to my enemies, they were gone. By the end of the month, My company was stronger than ever. And for the first time, I felt something real. Not revenge. Not satisfaction. Just peace. But even peace felt foreign. Like a suit that didn't quite fit. One night, I found myself in a familiar place, the bar where I used to meet Nicholas. The bartender recognized me. Whiskey. I nodded. He poured the drink, sliding it across the counter. Haven't seen you in a while. I let out a breath. Been busy. The bartender smirked. That a good thing? I hesitated. Was it? I had built an empire. I had crushed my enemies. But when I looked around, I saw nothing but empty spaces. Yeah, I said finally, taking a sip. It's a good thing. The bartender gave a knowing nod, like he didn't quite believe me but wasn't going to press. I appreciated that. I wasn't in the mood for self-reflection. I just wanted the drink. And maybe, just maybe, a reason to believe that this wasn't all there was. The next morning, I got a call. From Vivian. I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting in a way I hated. I shouldn't have cared. I shouldn't have felt anything. And yet, I let the phone ring. And ring. And then, finally, I answered. Jonathan. Her voice was shaky. Why are you calling me? I asked, my tone flat. A pause. Then, softly. I made a mistake. I clenched my jaw, closing my eyes. Vivian. I know, she whispered. I know you don't want to hear it. But I just needed you to know that I exhaled sharply. Don't. Just don't. Silence. Then, okay. I almost laughed. Just like that? Goodbye, Vivian, I said, before she could say anything else. Then I hung up. And for the first time since this all began, I didn't feel anything at all. Weeks passed. Life moved on. And one day, as I was walking through the city, I bumped into someone. A woman. She was beautiful. Not in the way Vivian had been, all sharp edges and carefully crafted perfection, but in a way that felt real. She had kind eyes. A warm smile. She laughed softly. I'm so sorry. I blinked, shaken from my thoughts. No, it was my fault. She tilted her head. You sure? You look like you were somewhere else. I let out a small, breathy chuckle. I guess I was. She studied me for a moment, then smiled. Well, wherever you were, I hope it was a good place. I hesitated. And then, for the first time in a long time, I told the truth. It will be. She smiled, extending her hand. I'm Evelyn. I shook her hand, something unfamiliar stirring in my chest. Something new. Something possible. Jonathan. She held my gaze for a beat longer than necessary. And for the first time in years, I was looking forward to what came next.